I never thought I would be telling this story. If you had asked me just a few months ago, I would have laughed and dismissed the idea. I was an ordinary woman, living an ordinary life, following my routine like everyone else. But all of that changed on October 3rd, 2023. That was the day I died. I didn't expect death to come for me so suddenly. There were no warnings, no strange dreams, no premonitions. The morning of October 3rd began just like any other day. I woke up before sunrise, stretched my arms, and thanked God for another chance to live. The golden light from the sun peeked through my curtains, casting soft shadows across my bedroom. It felt peaceful, completely normal. I got dressed in my navy blue work uniform, tied my hair back, and made my way to the kitchen. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the air as I poured myself a cup, savoring the warmth as I took my first sip. It was my routine: coffee, breakfast, then off to work. I worked as a caregiver at a senior living facility. Taking care of the elderly wasn't just a job for me. It was something I loved. I admired their wisdom, their stories, and the way they saw the world with eyes that had lived through history. That morning, my schedule was full, as always. I checked in on Mrs. Johnson, a spirited woman who loved to tell stories about her youth. She laughed as she recalled the days of dancing to old jazz records. Then, there was Mr. Ray, a man whose voice carried the echoes of gospel hymns from another era. Every morning, he hummed softly to himself, his voice blending with the soft hum of the world outside. It was a normal, peaceful day, and I had no idea that within hours, my life would change forever. By the evening, I was exhausted. My shift had ended, and I was eager to get home. My son had called earlier, asking me to bring home some cornbread from his favorite bakery. So, on my way home, I made a quick stop to pick it up. Outside, the weather had started to change. The sky, once clear, was now covered with heavy gray clouds. A light drizzle had begun, making the streets glisten under the glow of the streetlights. But I wasn't worried. I had driven in the rain many times before. As I got back into my car, I turned on my favorite gospel station and hummed along to the familiar melodies. My mind was filled with thoughts of dinner, of rest, of the simple joys of being home with my family. I had no idea that I was just moments away from the most terrifying experience of my life. The road home was familiar. I had driven this way countless times before, a route so routine that my hands moved on the wheel without thinking. The rain had picked up slightly, drumming softly against the windshield. I turned on my wipers, watching as the droplets streaked across the glass, disappearing into the night. The gospel song playing on the radio filled the car with warmth, a reminder of comfort and faith. I hummed along, my mind already at home, picturing my son's face lighting up when he saw the cornbread. Then, in an instant, everything changed. A blinding light flashed before my eyes. Headlights, too close, too fast. My heart slammed against my chest as adrenaline surged through my body. A massive truck was skidding toward me, its tires screeching against the wet pavement. It was out of control, a monstrous force barreling straight at me. Time slowed. I gripped the steering wheel, my instincts screaming at me to swerve. My foot slammed on the brakes, but the slick road betrayed me. The tires lost their grip, and my car began to slide. I heard the deafening blast of a horn, a desperate warning that came too late. Impact. A brutal force crushed into me, metal folding like paper. My body was hurled forward, the seatbelt digging deep into my chest, locking me in place. Glass shattered, sharp fragments flying in every direction. My head snapped back, then forward again, pain exploding through my skull. For a moment, there was chaos, sounds, motion, a storm of destruction. Then, nothing. Silence. I wasn't sure if I had lost consciousness or if the world itself had stopped. I couldn't feel my body. The pain had vanished, replaced by an eerie stillness. The sound of the rain faded. The music on the radio, the horns, the distant shouts, they all dissolved into a vast emptiness. I tried to move. Nothing. Panic should have taken hold of me, but it didn't. Instead, there was only a quiet realization creeping in. Something was very wrong. Darkness surrounded me. I couldn't see the shattered windshield, the wreckage of my car, or the flashing red and blue lights of emergency vehicles. It was as if I was floating, suspended between two realities. Then I saw it. My car, what was left of it, was barely recognizable. Twisted metal, broken glass, the hood crumpled inward like a crushed can. Smoke curled into the air, mixing with the misty rain. The scene should have terrified me. But what shook me to my core was what I saw inside the wreckage. Me, my own body, motionless, slumped in the driver's seat. My head tilted to the side, my arms limp. The rain dripped through the shattered windshield, washing over my face. I should have felt fear. I should have screamed, but I didn't. Because somehow, I wasn't in that car anymore. I was outside of it, looking in. I hovered there, staring at my own body, my mind struggling to process what was happening. It was an impossible sight. Yet there I was, watching myself as if I were just another bystander to the wreckage. Flashing red and blue lights cut through the rain-soaked night. The shrill wail of sirens grew louder as an ambulance came skidding to a stop near the crash site. Paramedics rushed forward, their voices sharp and urgent. "Get her out! We need to move fast!" Two men in dark uniforms fought against the mangled metal, trying to pry the door open. Rain pounded down on them, mixing with the glass shards and twisted debris scattered across the pavement. I wanted to move closer, to tell them I was right here, standing beside them. But something held me in place, an invisible force, as if I was meant to watch, and nothing more. One of the paramedics, a young man with dark hair, leaned into the wreckage and pressed 2 fingers to my neck. His brow furrowed. Then he turned to his partner and shouted, "She's got a pulse, but it's weak. We need to get her to the hospital now." A pulse? I frowned, confusion swirling inside me. If my heart was still beating, if I was still alive, then why was I here, outside my body? A strange sensation washed over me, something between warmth and pressure, as if unseen hands were gently holding me in place. I felt weightless, unburdened by pain, fear, or even the cold rain drenching the world around me. Yet at the same time I felt distant, disconnected from the life I had known just moments ago. I turned my gaze away from the wreckage, taking in my surroundings. Everything seemed sharper, more defined. The raindrops sparkled like tiny diamonds as they fell, catching the flashing ambulance lights in a way I had never noticed before. The air itself felt alive, heavy with something I couldn't quite explain. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement. At first, I thought it was another paramedic, but when I turned fully, my breath caught in my throat. It was my mother. She stood just beyond the ambulance, her hands clasped in front of her. Her face was calm, serene, exactly as I remembered it before she had passed away 5 years ago. I blinked, unable to believe what I was seeing. "Mama?" My voice barely formed the word, yet somehow she heard me. Her lips curled into a gentle smile, but she didn't speak. I took a step toward her, or at least I tried to. My body, if I even had one, felt strangely unresponsive, as if I was walking through water. The space between us stretched in an unnatural way, like an invisible barrier kept me from getting too close. Tears welled in my eyes. "Mama, what's happening?" She tilted her head slightly, her expression filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. There was love, yes, but something else, something deeper. And then, as suddenly as she had appeared, she began to fade. "No, wait." I reached out, but she was already gone, dissolving like mist in the night air. A sharp pull yanked at me from behind, like a strong tide dragging me backward. The world around me blurred, twisting into a haze of lights and shadows. I felt myself being pulled away from the scene, away from my mother, away from everything. Then, darkness. A sound, distant at first, broke through the void. Beeping. A steady, rhythmic beeping. I tried to move. Pain shot through me, sharp and immediate. My body ached, my limbs heavy as if they were weighed down by bricks. I forced my eyes open. Blinding white light. A sterile ceiling. The soft hum of medical equipment. I was in a hospital. I sucked in a ragged breath, my chest burning with the effort. Voices murmured around me, familiar yet distant. I turned my head slightly, and through the blur, I saw them. My family. My sister sat at my bedside, her face streaked with tears. My son clung to her, his small hands gripping her sleeve as if he were afraid to let go. When my sister noticed my eyes were open, her breath hitched. "Dorothy?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. I swallowed hard, my throat raw and dry. "Here." A sob broke from her lips as she grabbed my hand, squeezing it tight. "Oh my God, you came back. We thought we lost you." I let my eyes drift shut for a moment, exhaustion crashing over me. I had survived, but I knew, deep in my heart, that something had changed, and I wasn't sure if life would ever be the same again. The steady beeping of the heart monitor echoed in the sterile hospital room. a stark reminder that I was still here, still alive. My body ached in places I hadn't even known could feel pain, a deep, all-consuming soreness that seemed to press down on me like an invisible weight. Every breath felt like a battle, each inhale sharp and jagged, as if my ribs were protesting against the very act of living. I tried to move my fingers, testing whether my body still belonged to me. A dull, sluggish response. The IV needle in my arm tugged slightly as I shifted, reminding me just how fragile I was at this moment. I had survived, but I wasn't the same. Something within me had changed. My sister sat beside me, gripping my hand so tightly that I could feel the tremble in her fingers. Her eyes were red and swollen, a testament to the tears she had shed while waiting for me to wake up. My son, too young to fully understand the gravity of the situation, clung to her sleeve, his wide, worried eyes locked onto my face. "You were gone, Dorothy," my sister whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "They said you might not make it. The doctors, they didn't think you'd wake up." I swallowed, my throat dry and raw. "How long?" My voice was barely more than a rasp. 3 days, she answered, wiping at her cheeks. 3 days you were unconscious. They said it was a miracle your injuries weren't worse, that you didn't die at the scene. 3 days. It felt like a lifetime. It felt like a second. I closed my eyes, trying to piece together the fragments of my memory, the accident, the rain, the truck, the feeling of weightlessness, and then my mother. The sight of her standing just beyond the ambulance, watching me with a look I still couldn't fully understand. I opened my eyes again, glancing at my sister. I saw Mama. She froze, her grip on my hand tightening. "Dorothy?" "I know how it sounds," I said quickly, my voice hoarse but insistent. "But I saw her. She was there, right after the accident. She didn't say anything, but she was there." Her expression wavered between disbelief and the desperate desire to believe me. It could have been? Maybe a dream? Your mind trying to make sense of everything. I shook my head, ignoring the way the movement sent pain lancing through my skull. "No, it wasn't a dream. I know what I saw." She exhaled shakily, brushing her fingers through her hair. "Dorothy, you almost died. Your brain went through so much trauma. Maybe," she hesitated, choosing her words carefully, "maybe it was just your mind's way of protecting you." I let her words settle between us. Maybe she was right. Maybe it had been nothing more than a trick of my brain, a coping mechanism in the face of something too overwhelming to process. And yet, deep inside, I knew better. The doctors came in shortly after, their faces a mixture of professionalism and quiet astonishment. They checked my vitals, asked me questions, tested my reflexes. They spoke of my recovery with cautious optimism, marveling at how I had survived with injuries that should have been far more severe. "You're incredibly lucky," one of them said, shaking his head. "The impact was devastating. Most people in accidents like that don't make it, and yet here you are." Lucky, that's what they called it. A stroke of luck, a miracle even. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it, that I had been given another chance for a reason. As the hours passed, the weight of what had happened began to settle over me like a heavy fog. The world outside the hospital walls had continued turning, unchanged, unaffected. But for me, everything felt different. The sounds of the machines, the sterile scent of antiseptic, the quiet murmur of nurses in the hallway, all of it felt distant, like I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't quite define. My mind kept returning to that moment outside my body, to the sight of my own lifeless form slumped in the wreckage, to the overwhelming realization that, for a brief time, I had been somewhere else. I glanced at my son, still curled up beside my sister, his little hands wrapped around the fabric of her shirt. He was the reason I fought to stay, the reason I had to make sense of this. I wasn't supposed to be gone. I wasn't finished here. That night, long after my sister and my son had fallen asleep in the uncomfortable hospital chairs, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My body was battered and bruised, but my thoughts raced, refusing to quiet. I had been spared. I had been given another chance, and I had to figure out why. The days following my return from the hospital felt surreal. I was home, surrounded by familiar things, my son's laughter echoing through the house, the scent of fresh coffee in the morning, the quiet hum of the television in the background. But I no longer felt like the same person who had left for work that morning before the accident. Physically, I was healing. The bruises on my body were slowly fading, the pain in my ribs dulling with each passing day. The doctors said it would take time, but I would recover. What they didn't understand, what no one seemed to understand, was that my wounds weren't just physical. There was a weight in my chest, a constant pressure I couldn't explain. It wasn't fear. It wasn't grief. It was something deeper, something unshakable. I needed answers. I found myself replaying every moment of that night over and over again. The rain, the headlights, the sound of the crash, the feeling of weightlessness, the sight of my mother standing just beyond the ambulance, the way she had looked at me, not with sadness, not with shock, but with something else, a quiet understanding. But what did it mean? Why had I seen her? I tried talking to my sister again, but she brushed it off, repeating what she had said in the hospital. You were in shock, Dorothy. Your brain was trying to process the trauma. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to convince myself that she was right, that what I had seen was nothing more than a hallucination, a figment of my injured mind. But deep down, I knew better. Something had happened that night, something I couldn't explain away with logic. I needed to talk to someone who might understand. So I went to my pastor. It was late in the afternoon when I arrived at the church. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the empty pews. I found him in his office, flipping through a worn Bible, his reading glasses perched on the edge of his nose. He looked up as I stepped inside. Dorothy, he greeted warmly, motioning for me to sit. I heard about your accident. I'm so glad you're all right. I nodded, settling into the chair across from him. I don't know if I am, I admitted. Concern flickered across his face. What's on your mind? I hesitated before speaking, unsure of how to put my thoughts into words. I saw something, I finally said, or someone. His expression remained patient, encouraging. Tell me. So I did. I told him about the accident, about the moment I realized I was outside my body. I told him about the flashing lights, the paramedics, the way everything felt too real to be a dream. And then I told him about my mother. I don't know why she was there, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't say anything, but she looked at me like she knew something I didn't. My pastor was silent for a long moment, his fingers tapping lightly against the armrest of his chair. Finally, he sighed. Dorothy, what you went through was traumatic. The mind is a powerful thing. It can hold on to memories, bring forward familiar faces in moments of distress. It was the same answer my sister had given me. But it wasn't just a memory, I argued. I wasn't thinking about her. I wasn't even aware of what was happening. But I saw her. She was right there. He folded his hands together, his gaze thoughtful. Maybe what you saw wasn't about her. Maybe it was about you. I frowned. What do you mean? Maybe she was there as a reminder, he said gently. A sign that you still have more to do here. I let his words settle, rolling them over in my mind. More to do here. The thought had been pressing on me since the moment I woke up in that hospital bed. I left the church feeling both comforted and unsettled. I wanted to believe that there was a purpose behind what had happened, that my survival hadn't just been a random stroke of luck. But how was I supposed to figure out what that purpose was? That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after my son had gone to bed, staring at the steam curling from a cup of untouched tea. My thoughts wouldn't quiet. I knew I had been given another chance. But for what? And more importantly, was I ready to face whatever came next? The days passed, but the feeling of unease never left me. No matter how much I tried to return to my normal life, something inside me had shifted. The accident hadn't just left me with bruises and scars. It had left me with a lingering question, an unshakable need to understand why I was still here. I tried to go back to my daily routine, to immerse myself in work and the familiar rhythm of caring for others. At the senior living facility, my patients welcomed me back with warm smiles and concerned glances. You gave us quite a scare, sweetheart, Mrs. Johnson said one morning, gripping my hand with surprising strength for someone her age. But I knew you'd come back. God isn't done with you yet. Her words echoed what my pastor had said. I forced a smile, but the weight in my chest remained. The truth was, everything felt different. The world around me had not changed, yet I saw it through new eyes. Every conversation, every quiet moment, every passing interaction felt heavier, as though I was suddenly aware of something deeper beneath the surface. At night, sleep came in restless fragments. I would wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, though I couldn't remember what I had been dreaming about. Some nights, I thought I heard my mother's voice, soft and distant, calling my name. But when I opened my eyes, the room was silent. I tried to push it aside, to focus on the tangible, the logical, the things I could hold in my hands. But no matter how much I tried to ignore it, the question remained. Why had I survived? One evening, as I sat on the couch with my son, watching him scribble in his coloring book, I found myself studying him in a way I hadn't before. The gentle rise and fall of his small shoulders, the furrow of concentration on his face, the quiet hum of his voice as he talked to himself. I had almost lost all of this. A lump formed in my throat as I reached out, gently running my fingers through his soft curls. He glanced up at me, smiling. "Mommy, why are you looking at me like that?" he asked, his innocent eyes searching mine. I swallowed, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about how much I love you," he giggled, leaning into me. "I love you too." Tears burned in my eyes, but I blinked them away. That moment solidified something in me. Whatever the reason for my survival, I had to make it count. I started paying attention to things I had once taken for granted. The warmth of the sun on my skin, the way the leaves rustled in the wind, the simple joy of laughter. I noticed people more, the tired cashier at the grocery store, the elderly man sitting alone on a park bench, the mother struggling to calm her crying child. Had I been blind to all of this before? One Sunday, I stayed after church and helped organize food for the shelter downtown. It was something I had never done before. I had always meant to, but life had always seemed too busy, too full of excuses. But that day, something in me told me that I couldn't put things off anymore. As I handed out meals, I met a woman named Evelyn. Her face was lined with hardship, her hands rough from years of struggle. But when she looked at me, there was kindness in her eyes. "You remind me of my daughter," she said softly. "She used to help people, always said it was what God put her here to do." I hesitated before asking, "Where is she now?" Evelyn lowered her gaze. "She passed a few years ago." A quiet understanding settled between us. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm sorry," I whispered. She nodded, blinking away tears. "Thank you for being here today." And just like that, something inside me shifted again. Maybe the reason I was still here wasn't about finding some grand, world-changing purpose. Maybe it wasn't about searching for a single defining answer. Maybe it was about the small moments, the choices I made every day, the lives I touched in ways I might never fully understand. That night, as I tucked my son into bed, I kissed his forehead and whispered, "I love you." He smiled sleepily. "I know, Mommy." And for the first time since the accident, I felt something close to peace. As time moved forward, I found myself walking through life with a different perspective. The accident had taken something from me, the illusion that I had all the time in the world. Before that night, I had lived as if tomorrow was guaranteed. Now I understood how fragile everything was, how quickly it could all be taken away. At first, I struggled with that realization. The weight of it was overwhelming, pressing down on me in quiet moments when no one was watching. But instead of letting it consume me, I chose to let it change me. I started making different choices. I no longer rushed through my mornings, barely acknowledging my son as I prepared for the day. Instead, I sat with him at breakfast, listened to his stories, and cherished every small moment. At work, I didn't just go through the motions. I took my time with each patient, listening more deeply to their words, asking questions about their lives, their memories, their regrets. One afternoon, as I sat beside Mr. Ray, one of the elderly men I cared for, he sighed, staring out the window. "I used to think I had all the time in the world," he murmured. "But it slips away faster than you think." I nodded, understanding that truth more than ever now. "What would you do differently?" I asked. He chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh, I'd do everything differently. I'd work less, love more, I'd take more risks, but mostly I'd stop waiting for the right time. I'd realize that time is never right. It's just now." His words struck something deep within me. How much of my life had I spent waiting? Waiting for the right moment, the right opportunity, the right feeling? I thought back to all the times I had put things off, helping someone because I was too busy, saying I love you because I thought there would be another chance, pursuing dreams because I was too afraid to fail. That night, I sat alone in my living room, staring at the ceiling, letting Mr. Ray's words settle into my bones. Time is never right. It's just now. I had been given a second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. So I made a decision. I started saying yes more often. Yes to spending more time with my family. Yes to reaching out to old friends I had lost touch with. Yes to stepping outside of my comfort zone. I volunteered more at the shelter, helping serve meals, listening to the stories of those who had lost everything, yet still found reasons to smile. I began writing again, something I had always loved but had abandoned over the years, telling myself I was too busy, that it didn't matter. But it did, and most importantly, I forgave. I forgave myself for the years I had spent living in fear, for the mistakes I had made, for the love I had withheld. I forgave the people who had hurt me, not because they deserved it, but because I deserved peace. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, my sister joined me. She had been there for me since the accident, always checking in, always making sure I was okay. "You seem different," she said, watching me closely. I smiled, taking a deep breath of the cool evening air. "I think I am." She hesitated before asking, "Do you ever think about that night?" I glanced at her, seeing the worry in her eyes. She had been afraid for me, afraid that what had happened would break me. "I do," I admitted, "but not in the way you think." She looked relieved. "I was worried you'd get stuck in it, that it would haunt you." I shook my head. "No, if anything, it's made me appreciate everything more. It's made me want to live better." She reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm glad, Dorothy. I really am." As the sky turned shades of orange and purple, I felt a quiet sense of clarity settle over me. I had spent so much time searching for answers, trying to understand why I had survived. But maybe the reason didn't matter as much as what I chose to do with it. I wasn't the same person I had been before the accident, and I never would be again. And for the first time, I was okay with that. Life didn't suddenly become perfect after the accident. There were still challenges, still days where doubt crept in, where fear tried to pull me back into old habits. But something inside me had shifted, and I refused to go back to the person I had been before. I had always thought of life as something that happened to me, but now I saw it differently. Life was something I had to actively participate in. Every day was a choice to be present, to be kind, to be grateful, to not let fear dictate my decisions. One of the biggest changes I made was learning to truly be there for my son. Before, I had always been busy, working, worrying, running from one responsibility to the next. But now, I made time, real time. Instead of rushing through bedtime, I sat with him, letting him talk about whatever was on his mind. Instead of just hearing him, I listened. One night, as I tucked him in, he grabbed my hand and looked up at me with big, thoughtful eyes. "Mommy, are you happy?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean, baby?" He shrugged. "Before the accident, you were always tired. Now you smile more, you laugh more. It feels different." I felt my throat tighten. I hadn't realized how much my son had noticed, how deeply he had felt the shift in me. "I am happy," I whispered, brushing his hair back, "because I understand now how important it is to love the life we have." He grinned sleepily. "I love you, Mommy." Tears burned in my eyes as I kissed his forehead. "I love you too, baby." Another part of moving forward was facing things I had long avoided. For years, I had been holding on to resentment toward people who had hurt me, toward circumstances that had been unfair, toward myself for not being stronger. But carrying that weight had only ever slowed me down. I reached out to an old friend I had fallen out with years ago. The reasons for our falling out seemed so small now, so insignificant in the grand scheme of things. When she picked up the phone, there was a moment of silence before she spoke. "Dorothy?" she asked, disbelief in her voice. "Yeah," I said, exhaling slowly. "It's me." She hesitated. "I didn't think I'd ever hear from you again." "Me neither," I admitted. "But I don't want to waste any more time being angry about the past. If you're willing, I'd like to move forward." She was quiet for a moment. Then softly, she said, "I'd like that too." It wasn't always that easy. Some relationships couldn't be repaired, and that was okay. Moving forward didn't mean forcing things to be the way they were. It meant accepting things as they were and choosing to let go of the bitterness. I also found myself drawn to helping others in ways I never had before. I continued volunteering at the shelter, not just serving meals, but sitting with people, talking to them, hearing their stories. One evening, I met a young woman named Lisa. She was sitting alone in the corner, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She had a weary look in her eyes, the kind that came from years of hardship. I sat beside her, offering a warm cup of soup. "Would you like some company?" I asked. She looked at me, suspicious at first, but then she nodded. We talked for a long time that night, about life, about struggles, about hope. Before she left, she turned to me and said, "Thank you for seeing me. A lot of people look, but they don't really see." Her words stayed with me. How many people walk through life feeling unseen, unheard, forgotten? And how often had I been too caught up in my own world to notice them? Moving forward meant making sure I never let that happen again. As the months passed, I found myself feeling lighter. Not because life was easier, but because I was no longer weighed down by things that didn't matter. I still had fears, I still had doubts, but I had also learned that fear only had power if I let it. I had been given a second chance. Not just to live, but to truly be alive. And I wasn't going to waste it. One of the greatest lessons I learned after the accident was that life is built on choices. Every day, in small and big ways, we are shaping our future by the decisions we make. Before, I had lived as if I had no control, as if I were simply moving through life, reacting to whatever came my way. But now, I understood that I had a choice in how I responded to everything. I chose to let go of anger. I chose to love more openly. I chose to live with purpose. That didn't mean it was easy. Some days I still struggled with fear, with doubt, with the urge to slip back into old patterns. But now I recognize those moments for what they were. Opportunities to choose differently. One of the hardest choices I had to make was forgiving my father. He had never been a part of my life in the way I needed him to be. His absence had left scars I carried for years, shaping how I saw myself and how I trusted others. I had spent so long resenting him, believing that if I held on to that anger, it would somehow make up for the hurt. But it didn't. It only kept me trapped. One afternoon, after weeks of debating, I picked up the phone and dialed his number. My heart pounded as the line rang, and part of me hoped he wouldn't answer. But he did. "Hello." His voice was unfamiliar and yet deeply known at the same time. I swallowed hard. "It's me, Dorothy." There was a long silence. Then a shaky breath. "Dorothy, I never thought I'd hear your voice again." I exhaled slowly. I wasn't sure I'd ever make this call. "I don't blame you," he admitted. His voice was heavy with regret. "I know I hurt you. I know I let you down." For so long, I had imagined this moment. I had thought of all the things I wanted to say, all the ways I wanted to make him understand the pain he had caused. But now, sitting there with the phone pressed against my ear, I realized none of that mattered anymore. "I forgive you," I said simply. I could hear his breath hitch. "You do?" "Yes." The words felt like releasing a weight I'd been carrying for years. I wasn't saying that what he did was okay, or that it hadn't hurt me, but I was choosing to let go. Not for him, but for me. We didn't fix everything in that phone call. Some wounds take time to heal, but for the first time, I felt peace in a place where there had only been pain. That was the power of choice. In the months that followed, I continued making choices that aligned with the life I wanted to live. I spent more time with my son, truly present in every moment. I deepened my relationships with my family and friends. I pursued the things that brought me joy, instead of putting them off for someday. I started writing again, something I had loved since childhood, but had always found excuses to avoid. I poured my thoughts onto paper, capturing my experiences, my struggles, my hopes. One day, I shared a piece of my writing with a friend. She read it quietly, then looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Dorothy, this is powerful," she said. "You need to share your story." I hesitated. "I don't know. Who would want to hear it?" She shook her head. "You don't know who needs to hear it, but I promise you, someone does." That conversation stayed with me. I had spent so much time questioning why I had survived the accident, searching for some grand reason. But maybe the answer wasn't about one single purpose. Maybe it was simply about living in a way that could inspire others. So I started sharing. At first, it was just small things, conversations with friends, reflections in my journal. But then I took a bigger step. I spoke at a local community event, sharing my story of survival and the lessons I had learned. The response overwhelmed me. People came up to me afterward, some with tears in their eyes, thanking me for speaking the words they hadn't been able to say themselves. One woman, older, with lines of experience etched into her face, took my hands and said, "I've been holding on to pain for so long. Hearing you speak, it's helped me let go." And in that moment, I knew this was why I was still here. Not for one big reason, not for some grand mission, but to simply live with intention, to use my life and my story to help others in whatever way I could. Every day, we have a choice, to stay the same or to grow, to hold on or to let go, to live in fear or to step forward in faith. I had been given a second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. And maybe, just maybe, my story could help someone else find the courage to embrace their own second chance too. Life is fragile. One moment, you're planning dinner, driving home, thinking there's always tomorrow. And then, everything changes. I know because it happened to me. I was given a second chance, but not everyone gets one. For years, I lived like many of you, working hard, always busy, always waiting for the right time to love deeper, to forgive, to pursue what truly mattered. But let me tell you the truth. The right time never comes. The only time we have is now. Maybe you're holding on to past pain. Maybe you've been waiting to fix a broken relationship, to chase a dream, to finally choose joy over fear. What are you waiting for? Regret is heavier than failure. I was spared for a reason, and I believe you are here for a reason too. Your life, your choices, they matter more than you think. So don't wait. Tell the people you love how much they mean to you. Let go of what's been weighing you down. Take that leap of faith, because tomorrow isn't promised, but today is yours. Make it count.